Okay, a very, very good afternoon, everybody. Richie Prior. I'm on the beautiful island of Mallorca. I'm delighted to be speaking to Rick Finlay. Rick is in the sunny area of Hertfordshire. Are you?
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
country
North
where I'm
London.
from, Rick?
North London, Barnet, to be specific, and it is pretty sunny here too.
Oh, is it? That's good. That's good to hear. Now, for those of you who may not have heard of Rick, very, very extensive career in both theatre and live music. A lover of jazz, a player of jazz, a music teacher, and to top it all off, is the vice chair of the executive committee of the Musicians Union. Rick is a drummer by trade, not just drums though. He does do other things, which I'll let him explain to you in a second. But Rick, I'd like to start with really sort of how this all started for you. How did you sort of get into the music world? Where did this all begin?
Well, I mean, my story is probably similar to other musicians in some respects, and I'll tell you about that. But I mean, the other thing that I'm sure you and your viewers, listeners will be aware of is that every musician finds their own way through this industry, and for every musician there's a different story, and it's always an interesting series of accidents and luck and experience that gets you to where you are. And for me, it started with a love of music, of course, and playing all sorts of different instruments at a young age, but sort of centering eventually on drums and percussion. And quite early on in my career, well, in fact, I studied design at university, which was another interest of mine and absolutely nothing to do with music. Mm-hmm. But whilst I was doing that, I got involved with, student bands and colleagues, and got more and more interested in seeing if I could pursue music as a career. And then when I graduated and I was trying to kind of get some work as a musician, I was also doing a bit of teaching, which now when I think back on it is extraordinary because I don't think I had much experience to teach about. But there I was telling other young drummers how to play, and one of them was an actor. And he was working, he was about to start work with a touring musical. And they said, well, we need a drummer. And that was how it started, really, and I didn't really know much about that world, but as I got involved with it, and I started to meet that community of musicians who are involved in musical theatre, I suddenly sort of understood that this was a major area of work for musicians. And that's gone alongside lots of other stuff in my career. I mean, I've never been just purely down that road. I've always kind of made up what we call a portfolio career with a whole mix of different work. Which I think is, for me, is very enjoyable. I mean, not every musician likes to have that mix, but for me, I love all aspects of music work. And of course, it's given me a little bit of buffer through when one area goes a bit quiet, there's work in another area.
So you spent 22 years working which is an amazing show, I know, Blood Brothers in the West End. That is a hell of an amount of time, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, some of your listeners may be aware that it might appear that when you're doing that kind of work, you don't do anything else, but that's not how it is. In fact, the people who are involved in long-running shows as musicians use that work as a kind of anchor against which all the other work sits. And, I don't doubt my good fortune in having such a steady period of work, but it enabled me to do lots of other stuff, knowing that I had a job to come back to. And not only a job, but a very pleasant job. I mean, Blood Brothers was a fantastic piece of theatre and happened to be a very nice company to work with, which is another reason why 22 years was bearable. It isn't always that easy. Sometimes you get, as in any organisation, you get culture clashes and cliques within the organisation. But Blood Brothers was great. And, I reckon that over that 22-year period, I probably averaged about 60% of the performances. And so the rest of the time would have been touring, gigging, writing, recording, holidaying, and having a very mixed career.
Yeah, because for people that don't know, that what you are able to do, as long as your relationship with the musical director or the fixer, as sometimes he's known, is that you can sort of go out off and do and dep somebody else in order to take your place while you go off and do other things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a well-established custom and practice. And I know people in other steady jobs kind of look at that with their jaws on the floor. But in fact, it's a very good recipe for for good performance, because what happens is that the regular players have a chance to kind of stretch their legs and exercise their musical brains in other areas, and they come back to the theatre refreshed. And meanwhile, of course, you're building this fantastic pool of what you call deputies. The Americans call them substitutes. So there's this whole pool of players who are kind of itinerant players covering absent regulars from the shows. And that means that you've got a kind of inbuilt upskilling of the musical community, which the producers of the theatres benefit from hugely.
Now, how does it work with regards to you sitting in a pit, as it is, the orchestra pit? You can't normally, apart from maybe a screen or something, you can't normally see the actors on the stage. Would I be right in saying?
There's probably no real normal, although in more recent productions, it's become very typical for the musicians to be in almost like a purpose-built studio environment under the stage. You know, people will remember that the tradition of musical theatre is an orchestra pit at the front, and you can lean over and see those musicians, you know, digging away at their instruments, and the musicians have some connection with the stage. But yeah, no, in contemporary productions where they're trying to get a very kind of modern produced sound from the band, they tend to isolate the band. You see, if you need to see the stage, you'll have a little television screen, you know. Sometimes if you need to see the conductor, you'll have a little television screen. So it is a peculiar set of specialized skills to play in an orchestra pit. And overall, I did about 30 years continuously in the West End before that aspect of my career sort of, I think, has drawn to a close, you know. But over that time, I saw a lot of changes and did a lot of different shows, had a lot of experiences.
Now, would I be right in saying, because I have a sort of inside knowledge of this, I won't drop this person in it, to be perfectly honest, but and I don't know whether this will work for a drummer, but I know people that play other instruments that sometimes have gaps in the show where they maybe not play for about, I don't know, half an hour, and it has been known that these people would leave the said area to maybe partake in some you know, light beverages.
I can't believe what you're insinuating, Richie. Of course, that used to happen. It doesn't happen now.
Okay, right, fine, yeah.
You know, one thing that has changed over the time that I worked in theatre is that the standard of the technical demands of the musicians have got higher and higher. The result being that you've got the very best of the best playing in orchestra pits in the West End. And funnily enough, there has been a change in culture. You know, I think the heavy drinking culture is maybe not there in the way it was before. But people do get up to other things. I mean, there's a constant discussion amongst musicians. Is it good to have a show where you're playing absolutely continuously and you're kind of engaged, but you've got no chops left at the end of the night? Or is it good to have a show like Blood Brothers where there were a lot of gaps? And in those gaps, I would read, do my accounts, do my emails, have a nap. Amazingly, you develop this instinct to kind of nap for 20 seconds and then wake up for the next cue, you know. So it's such a peculiar culture. You could really, well, I think someone has written a book about some of the weird things that musicians get up to in orchestra pits. But I will just say in closing that little segment that alongside that, the performance standard is so high. I mean, there's such a sense of responsibility amongst those musicians to deliver a great performance that people would be staggered to know how they flip between one activity and another.
I'm fascinated to know the difference between playing in a theatre to then playing live gigs. You know, you've played for lots of different people, including Mel C, Marty Pellow, Cliff Richard, David Soul, David Cassidy, amongst others. What is the difference from your, as in your point of view as a drummer, from theatre work to live gigging?
Well, I should clarify that all those particular names which you've seen on my biog, they were all people that I had associations with in theatre doing musicals.
Oh, okay.
But of course, I have done lots of other live work. And these days, the difference is bigger and bigger. I mean, the experience of performing in a live arena where you're in contact with the musicians, where the sound issues are very different. It's much less controlled than a theatre environment because it's not reproducible every night. And of course, you've got all the kind of vagaries of live performance, probably probably a bit more variability from performance to performance compared to theatre. And maybe the primary difference as a musician is that the audience have come to see you. And whenever my West End colleagues get a bit too full of themselves, I remind them that most people are paying to watch the stuff on the stage and enjoy their music. You know, they haven't come out to see Rick Finlay play the drums, you know, and we need to be a bit grounded about that.
And then the differences for you then from what you've done stage, you've done live gigging, to actually being a teacher of music, because I imagine over the course of time, drumming has changed in such a dramatic way in ways of playing, you know, setup of drums. How has that changed over the course of your time?
Well, there've been lots of interesting changes, and one thing I would say is that a lot of musicians teach, and a lot of them, like me, are very passionate about their teaching. You know, it's not a little kind of pocket money activity on the side. It's very central to my study and development as a musician, and it goes absolutely hand in hand with performance and recording, because you know, passing on your experience and knowledge is not only of benefit to the students. I mean, I learned so much from trying to communicate to my students what it is I do and how do I solve those problems, you know, live. And sometimes when you come to think about it, you come to a realization about something you do that has been very intuitive for a long time. So teaching is a great way of kind of growing as a player and driving my research as a musician, because I think musicians have to be researchers. You have to constantly be listening and learning from, you know, all the amazing stuff that's out there. Now, one of the big changes for drummers over my career has been the kind of growth and decline and growth again of electronic drums and studio technology. So when I first started, it was just the beginnings of programming drums being used in a very widespread way. And that set an incredible target for real drummers who were having to reproduce these beautifully, perfectly synchronized electronic drum tracks. And we were being asked to replicate those live, you know, so it drove technical standards up a lot. And then, of course, there was a lot of debate about, you know, whether that was musically desirable, you know, what was happening to the sound of drums, what was happening to performance, was it becoming too clinical? And so there was a very interesting philosophical debate running alongside the technical challenge of understanding this new technology, being able to use it, being able to work alongside it. That for drums has been a very big factor. And now a lot of my young students who are beginning their drumming careers, they learn on electronic drum kits, which is obviously nice for the neighbours, because all the neighbours here is pitter-patter. But there's this fascinating change when they come here and they play in my studio on real drums, and suddenly there's this whole additional element of touch and finesse and acoustic sound, which for me is one of the most fascinating things about playing real acoustic instruments, that kind of very organic link between how it feels to play and the sound you get back.
Now, you are very much into your jazz. You play in a jazz group. You manage this group as well, don't you?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I wouldn't get too grand about it. I think jazz all over the world has always been a kind of cottage industry, with the exception of the kind of real high flyers that we all admire and know about. But for every kind of Miles Davis or John Coltrane, you know, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of really excellent players who are kind of living hand to mouth, because jazz is a kind of niche interest, and it's a very, very challenging style of music or genre of music to play. And what often drives the musicians in that world is not, well, certainly not the financial reward. It's the intellectual and artistic challenge of taking that music to the highest level. So yeah, you know, my band, which is called Just East, we've been in existence for about 25 years. We've enjoyed making 5 albums and touring pretty extensively, especially in the early years of the band. And now we're at a slightly different stage in our career where we're still working, we're still writing stuff, but we're so involved with lots of other activities that it's a little bit backseat for the moment. However, alongside Just East, we decided that we wanted a chance to play regularly with our British jazz colleagues. And so me and my business partner, Jeremy Shoham, we set up a regular jazz gig in a North London venue near here, a little village called Colindale, which some of your listeners might know about.
Yeah.
Tiny little pub. And we put on music twice a month, or we did, until what's happened recently. And we've had the great and the good of British jazz musicians come and play with us, including some of your listeners will have heard of Jim Mullin and Leanne Carroll and Ed Jones. And, you know, we've had some really, the best players in the country, and some of them are real world-class players, have come and joined us for the joy of exploring music on the spot, unrehearsed, in the moment, for the great and good of Colindale.
Fantastic. So listen, you just touched on what we really need to get into right now is, since the middle of March, since the COVID outbreak, and, you know, obviously lots of industries have stopped, but one of the sort of the big industries that has so affected, not I think on one side where obviously you guys haven't been able to work, but from a point of view of people actually going to be able to enjoy what you do, is on the other side. You know, there's two sides to this. There's the working side for you, but there's the enjoyment side for us, the paying public, to go and watch this stuff, and we haven't been able to do it. So the world has changed dramatically. How has this affected your industry?
I have a sense of what's happening in our industry because of something you mentioned earlier. I'm involved as a voluntary activist in the Musicians Union. That's our trade union for our field of work. And I mentioned that first of all because I just want to say, I mean, I'm not a spokesperson for the MU. Nothing I say is an expression of MU policy, but obviously being involved as a board member there, we call it the executive committee, but it's the management board of the union. Being involved in that means that I'm very aware of what's going on in all aspects of our industry, and I hear testimony and stories from our colleagues, and it is absolutely disastrous. Something like 40% of our members have had no access to financial help from the government. You'll be aware that the UK government has offered some schemes to people who've lost work, but you know, almost half of our members haven't been able to access that. And so, you know, I was talking to just one colleague the other day who said he normally tours internationally with absolutely top end recording artists, and he said he's earned £300 since March. He's looking at having his property repossessed, and he's very fearful. And that story is replicated hundreds and hundreds of times, thousands of times, you know, and it's tragic to hear that testimony. And it's really challenging to see what lines of help the union and other musicians' organisations can provide for these people. But we're working hard at it, you know.
So there's two sides to this. Obviously, there's a theatre side, and then there's obviously live gigging side. Because I don't know whether you can run the two side by side, because theatre is also, majority of the time is inside. Live gigging can be outside, can be inside, I suppose. So let's look at it from a theatre point of view first of all. Obviously, I've seen people like Cameron McIntosh and Andrew Lloyd Webber trying to get this thing moving, even if it was socially distanced, which, you know, I think it could be. I don't really see that. I'm in an industry that is a tourist industry where people flying on planes, people can fly on planes sat next to other people, but somebody can't go into a theatre and maybe not have someone sat next to them, but maybe someone sat next 2 seats away or whatever. It does seem a bit strange right now to me, and I work in the theatre industry as well, as I've told you before, that people can't go to the theatre right now.
Yeah, it is strange. I think a lot of our Musicians Union members and the union itself is trying very hard to kind of persuade the government that there might be opportunities for relaxing those social distancing rules, because that's one of the keys. I mean, you're talking specifically about theatre to start with, and when we talk about that, the problem is that you've got big auditoriums, audiences of 1,000 and upwards, and the industry depends on really high attendance to balance the books. Right. It's absolutely unviable with audiences of 30%, which is what the current regulations would require. And but I would be wary about, I mean, it's very tempting when you're fearful for your job to say, look, we've just got to open the theatres. If we can put people on planes, we can open the theatres. In fact, I understand that France has kind of made an announcement and said to people, go and support music. We're opening venues to 5,000 plus. And,
Yeah, I saw that.
you know, they're having tremendous problems in France. So whilst I have sympathy for people who are keen to get us back to work, I don't think it is simple. I mean, I think there are some difficult challenges, but there are some other solutions that are being offered by the industry or being proposed by the industry. And I think you might be aware there's this campaign called Seat Out to Help Out.
To help out, that's right.
So
yeah.
this is, you know, that little slogan has come from another bit of help that the government gave to the hospitality food industry over August, where they subsidised food in restaurants for punters. And what our industry is saying is, look, you know, you could do a similar thing for theatres, for live performances in large venues, where you could help to balance the books by saying that we recognise you can't have big attendance, but we'll make up the shortfall. Mm-hmm. I think that's a campaign that has real potential. And I know, as you said, that our audiences are really hungry to get back and support live music and hear live music. Culture is absolutely at the centre of many people's lives. So I think there's a real enthusiasm for that. And we're working hard to persuade the powers that be to adopt that as an idea.
That would be similar, I imagine, then for live gigging as well. It would be a very similar sort of thing. Maybe not so much, well, inside definitely, but outside, surely there is a bit more a sort of hope, isn't there? But outside you can do more. I interviewed a DJ friend of mine, a guy called Judge Jules, the other week, and he started to do live outside gigs that are socially distanced. Everybody's in their sort of bubble of a 3 meter squared area. And it started to sort of get a bit of traction, this thing, because I think, as you just said, there's an appetite for people to get back to these things, because with everything else having stopped, you know, you know, I'm a football fan as well. It's the same in football. People want to get back and enjoy these things again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think you're an Arsenal fan, aren't you, like me?
Oh yes.
Are we allowed to say that?
There's two of us, so there you go. Yeah, I am.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I miss the gigs. It's like an ache, but I also miss the football in a similar way, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think that the outdoor gig thing has been a viable solution and has actually gained quite a lot of momentum here. But of course, we're not in Mallorca here. We're in rainy UK, and we're not going to be able to keep that going for much longer. So it's helped. In fact, I even went to see some live comedy over the summer. We all sat in our cars and hooted our horns when
Oh yeah, I heard about this. Yeah, that sounded
it was great fun, you know.
Yeah.
Not the same, but it was great fun.
I think you know what has happened right now. I think people have got to think outside the box. We've got to think of new ways of doing things. For instance, we have a situation here in our bars that we're not allowed to play live music. So what somebody did, the bar basically set up TV screens all around the bar, and the singer did a live gig from their house and transported that to the bar, to the TV screens, and basically looked like obviously they were doing the gig, not live in the bar itself, but on the TV screens. And like you just said, like the comedy thing, we have to start thinking outside the box. We might not like, or when we compare it to something, it might not be the same. But until we can get back to actually going to a theatre as we did before, then we've got to think outside the box, I think, right?
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I think I just heard on the radio the director of the Young Vic, you know, one of London's 50-year-old theatres. It's celebrating its 50th anniversary. And he was saying on the radio, you know, when theatre comes back, it will never be as it was before. We don't know quite what it's going to be in the future, but, you know, we're ready to adapt. And one of the things he said was that he imagined that cameras will be embedded in theatres forever. And that opportunity to kind of share work over the internet is likely to be a fairly common experience in the future. And I think he's probably right. You know, one of the things that our industry is facing is that when you make a change like that, it can quite often have quite a big impact on the economics of the industry. And often those changes happen in a gradual evolutionary way, while the industry has time to adapt. And I think the challenge here is that, for example, monetizing streamed and broadcast culture is a challenge for our industry. And as long as that challenge is not solved, money is not going into the pockets of performers and creators. And For some of them, that means it's the end of their career. But I think there are some signs of optimism. I'm going to give you a couple because I don't want to be entirely negative. I mean, the recording industry in this country, which is a very big part of the music economy, and in this country we record a lot of music for films and television and games. It's massive. And although that shut down for a couple of months, it was one of the first sectors to come back, because in that controlled studio environment, you can do quite a lot. And that industry is really well on the road to recovery. I think the small gig scene is creeping back here. I'm talking about, little art centres, particularly sort of venues like pubs and clubs where the capacity is maybe between 50 and 100. And you may think, well, that's kind of absolute borderline. But for a lot of musicians, that stuff is part of their economy. And those are coming back. And in fact, today I was reading about a colleague of mine, a wonderful jazz guitarist called Nigel Price, who's managed to set up something like a 35-date tour in the UK, starting next month, in all these little clubs and venues. So people are working their way through it. And I think some of that side of our industry is coming back. And then in contrast to that, we have the world of theatre, big venues, large performance venues, 5,000 plus seaters, orchestras, massive problem, and if you think about it, orchestras are one of the areas where you've got long-term, year-round, stable employment for a lot of musicians. And that area of our industry is on its knees. So there's some good stuff. There's promising signs. I think, as you said, there are technological and other solutions to the way forward, but it's going to take a while to bed those in, I think.
Rick, listen, it's been fascinating to speak to you this afternoon. I really appreciate you giving up your time. I know you're busy as you are in you're teaching more and everything else. I just hope that we can get back to some sort of normality in the music industry, because as I say, I think it's important for people right now to be able to enjoy, with all the other things going on, to be able to enjoy these things, whether it be live theatre, whether it be live gigging. As you say, I listen with hope, and I'm glad to hear that things are starting to get back to some sort of normality. It might take a bit more time, but let's hope.
Richie, I'm very grateful for your interest in this opportunity to share our story, because I think audiences and musicians alike can put pressure on governments and funding agencies to kind of recognise the situation we're in. So thank you for your time today. That's great.
No problem at all. And as I say, everybody out there, have a look at this Seat Out to Help Out scheme. It is out there, and I know that a lot of people are out there pushing the government to get this going, because I think it was an absolutely spectacular thing that worked for the hospitality industry, as we've talked about earlier. And I think this could be something could be really, really good for the the theatre industry and the live music industry going forward. Which I think there's not many people I don't know enjoy this as a genre. Do you know what I mean? And everything else.
Yeah.
Depending on what genre you're into, there is so many different ones, and at least one somebody is interested in. So I think, listen, I'm really, really happy to help out. I hope that hopefully maybe we'll get together again in maybe 6 months' time and speaking, and you're back in the West End, and you're banging those drums out again, and
well, wouldn't that be interesting?
Live gigging. And maybe I'll see you with my brother-in-law one day, or at the Arsenal, of course, which is another thing.
Absolutely, yes. You at one end of the stadium and me at the other end, because we're going to have to be a little way apart. I hope so too. And it would be interesting actually for us to hook up again in a few months' time and see where we're at.
I agree. Listen, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. Check Rick out online, and rickfinlay.com online. Is it, Rick?
Yeah. That's where I am.
There you go. You can find out a lot more about him. And if maybe your kids are looking to get into the music industry, Rick would be a great person to talk to. He's got so much knowledge about the industry. Rick, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richie. Have a good day.
Take care.